entering the Zoom. Okay, so I'm gonna give the answers already, where we have like these things like gay colors, evening party time, and voice for the 50s, and gay marriage, men, rights, people, and men for 2020s. Now, how can I use collocations in my teaching materials, right? Well, let's say you have a student who always uses the same word to modify a noun. It is always like interesting study, interesting study. And you want them, I feel like I found this a lot when I was teaching writing. You want them to like diversify their vocabulary, right? So you can search for what are the collocates of study and like what adjectives come before study, and maybe like some of the examples will be useful for the students. Like for example, here I'm gonna search for the collocates of study in this website called Just the Words. And as I mentioned before, the link is gonna be on the Padlet later. You don't need to like Google for this website, but it's called Just the Word. So I search for study on Just the Word, and it will give me this. You can see like a lot of information. So it gives me like verbs where the object is study. Study as a subject of a verb. Study as a subject of a noun. So this will be like noun, noun modifiers. Adjective plus study. This is the one I'm interested in. I want to know like what other adjectives appear before study aside from just, interesting study. But there's all like these other options. I can also search for study as a verb. And if I click on adjective plus study, this is what I'm going to see. You can see there's like different clusters. So it says like careful study, close study, comprehensive study, academic study, cultural study, educational study, literary study, theoretical study. So then I get a lot of different words that could be used to modify study. So I could ask the students which adjectives are used to describe study. And also like try the same search with other nouns, not only study, but also like research, investigation, and explain how these words are used in academic English. So with the first two exercises, I want to illustrate to the student like other adjectives that could be used to modify the word study. But with the second like set of exercises here, I want to demonstrate how the same procedure can be replicated with other words. Because remember, my goal is not only for students to use corpus in their classroom, like when they are with me, but also so that they learn how to do this when they have a question, when they're like, oh, what other words can I use here? Like for them to become independent learners. I could also like do a task that will encourage students to do some editing. So like read the following text excerpts from the British National Corpus. Based on your search of the word study, suggest other adjectives that could be used in the sentences to replace like fascinating, because here we have like fascinating study all the time. So the goal of this activity will be to help students develop like these skills to edit their own writing. So we learned about collocations, Zoom allowing. We're going to learn now about word lists. You might be familiar with word lists because word lists is like a list of all the words in a text or in a corpus and the frequency of these words. There have been several word lists created to represent different discourse domains. So for example, the academic word list, AWL, informs a lot of the textbooks we use in EAP classes, but there are also like discipline specific word lists like the nursing word list, business word list. Recently there I seen like a law word list or like the contracts word lists. So there is plenty of word lists that can help like inform our teaching. But word lists, so there are like a couple of tools that might be helpful. So this is the complete Lex tutor. You can paste the text here and it gives you the percentage of academic words in a corpus. You can see this like, or in a text, right? You can see this yellow count here, so 16.05% are the words that are in the academic word list. The green ones are like the second tier most frequent words in English, and the first, like the blue one, are the most frequent words in English. Why is that interesting? Let's say I ask my students to write an academic essay, like an argumentative essay, but they write it like using very informal language. I can ask them to paste their text here and see if their language is like more academic or not. Usually we recommend like 10% of academic words in a text that is academic. I could also do the opposite. Let's say I'm asking my students to write a blog post, but they're being too academic, which also happens, people. And then I can ask them to like paste the text here and show them like, this is too academic. You have to write like in language that lay people will understand. Another tool like this is vocabulary and phrase, like word and phrase. And this one only gives you the most frequent words in a corpus. So it doesn't tell you which ones are academic or not. So this is helpful for like a pre-teaching activity. Let's say you're teaching a text that you don't know which words the students might have encountered or not. So when you see here 1 to 500, these are words that occur, the 500 most frequent words in English. So probably your students have encountered that. 501 to 3000 are like the second band, right? So like 500 to 3000 more frequent words, most frequent words in English. Maybe depending on the level of your students, they have encountered these words or not. And then when you have like lower than 50,000, these are the words that, for example, I would start pre-teaching if I was giving this text for my students. Word and phrase, you can find on Coca again, and there's like this little button here that looks like an old text. If you click here, this window will appear, and then you just paste the text here and click Analyze Text, and it will give you results. Now, one tool that I find very useful for students to use is Voyant tools, because they can create their own corpus and analyze their own texts using Voyant tools. And this is the example I'll use here. So how can I use word lists in my teaching materials? Let's say I ask the students to write like an essay. This essay is about climate change. So you can see the word energy is repeated a lot here. So I can ask the students to go to Voyant tools. So this is how the website looks like, and add their text to this box. Once they add their text to, so this is the text, right? I just copy and paste this text in this box, and this is what the website gives to me. You can see it gives me a word cloud of the most frequent words in the text, but it also, like here, it gives me a table, right? It says energy occurs 12 times, earth 7 times, use 6 times. And it automatically creates these concordance lines of my text, like energy. Here I'm going to highlight like the word function, right? So I can ask students to say what words and phrases are the most frequent in your text, and you can see that like energy occurs 12 times, or like climate change occurs 3 times. So climate change might not be a problem because it's only 3 times. But in a short text like this, energy occurs 12 times might be questionable. So I can ask them to look at the context where energy is used and ask, could this be paraphrased? In this example, like it might not be possible for all instances, but some instances, maybe I could use a pronoun to refer back to energy, or I could use another term. So these questions, they aim to draw students' attention to like their different word choices that they're doing in their text. There's another, so we learned like concordance lines, keyword in context, collocations, and word lists. There's another functionality that I find like very interesting for when I'm teaching academic writing. And this is the charts on COCA. This really tracks like language change. So frequency charts can highlight how a word is used in different text types, either like for genres or registers, or show lexical change across time. So here I use the chart function on COCA to search for the expression old school. So you can see here, when is old school most frequent? Did people in the 90s use the expression, oh, this is so old school? What do you think? Based on what you can see here. Oh, I have answers in the chat. Okay, so Aram says in the chat 2010. So yeah, the most used, like the highest frequency of use of old school is from 2010 to 2014. You can see it's actually decreasing now from 2015 to 2019. But you can see that in the 90s, nobody was saying, oh, this is old school. So usually when people use the expression old school, they might be referring to the 90s themselves, which makes me old school. Now you can also use this to track the difference between like words if they're most common in a specific register or specific genre. So you can see here we have adolescent and teenager, which are basically like synonyms. But if we look at this graph here, the first graph, where does adolescent occurs most? In blogs, web, in TV and movies, in spoken, in fiction, magazines, news, or academic writing? Where does adolescent is like most frequent? Okay, the chat has answers. The chat has answers. Academic writing for sure. Now, teenager, again, we have like blogs, web, TV and movies, spoken, fiction, magazine, news, and academic writing. Where does it occur the most? News, right? Yeah, so I can see the answers in the chat. News, and probably to report negative things. But clearly, where it occurs the least is academic writing. So I can use this to show like if that word is appropriate in that context or not to my students. And I have an example of this. How can I use charts in my classroom? So let's say I have here my third example of a student. Let's say a student wrote for like a very academic essay. In 4 states with a substantial minority of Spanish speakers, the legislature turned down the official English bills that were introduced. Turn down is not wrong, I can understand the meaning, but it's a phrasal verb. So I could just like cross it out and say like phrasal verbs, don't write phrasal verbs. But I could also like do something different. I could search for turn down on Coca using the charts function and then show the students, where does turn down appear? Primarily in TV and movies. We rarely see it in academic writing. Here in my graph, right? You can see it. So I can like give students quantitative information based on language use, data from language use, so that they can understand this difference. Like here is a proposal of a task. So I could ask like, what are phrasal verbs more frequent in academic writing or spoken registers or genres? I could ask students to like use their intuitions, but then look at the drafts of assignments that they wrote for my class and find examples of phrasal verbs and make a list. And then use COCA, use for the phrasal verbs in this list. And then they would see graphs exactly like this one I just showed you, like this one. And then we ask them like to write about which type of text are these phrasal verbs more frequently used. So here, for example, I have point out. So this is how I'll do the search on COCA. I'll click on chart, point out, see frequency by section, and you can see that it's more frequent in spoken text or in blogs, but not as frequent in academic writing. It's even not frequent in news and magazines, so not really used in writing. So I covered the first challenge, right? Like teachers don't have corpus training. Now you do have corpus training. I realize I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna be very fast on like, it's all Zoom's fault. On like teachers don't know about the availability of useful corpus tools, because now you will know. So there's Lingo, Scale, CorpusMate, Just a Word, and NetSpeak. I know there's a lot. I remember there's a Padlet. So Scale is Sketch Engine for Language Learning, which is like a search tool geared towards teachers. It gives like collocations based on part of speech. So this is really useful if you want like to find what adjectives modify a noun or like which verbs go with a specific noun. It also has concordance lines, so if you want to find examples to create fill-in-the-blank exercises. And it has a function called synonyms that shows and create word clouds of words that appear in similar contexts. So I find this like very helpful. CorpusMate was created specifically for teachers, so it has a profanity filter that like you could use in your classroom because students won't find like taboo topics or any like profanity. It also has the functionalities of collocations, concordance lines, keyword in context, and charts, just like everything that I mentioned before. Lingo, it's very helpful to find examples of words being used. It shows concordance lines. You can find synonyms, but like in order to find synonyms on Lingo, you need to know like special characters, for example. It gives collocations, but again, you need to know like some special characters. Just a Word is the one that I showed before. It has the option of collocations and concordance lines. It's really nice like to see the words that would modify a different word. And then NetSpeak shows collocations and concordance lines, but you need to know like special characters. So you need to know regex in order to use it. So it's not like that user friendly. Okay, so I covered the tools, and remember there's a Padlet that I'll share. Now, corpus analysis is a complex and time-consuming task. It is, but there's plenty of like resources published for free and for like resource books that help teachers find DDL lesson plans and materials that you could just like make a copy and apply to your classroom without really having to do the research. So some of the resources I want to point out here. So Randy Rappin has this book that is like using Corpora in the language classroom, where she details how she would do that and it gives like 5 tasks. Eric Frehinau has this book that is like longer. It talks about like different resources online for teachers and some classroom activities. My favorite one is Teaching English with Corpora, which has 72 tasks. Like there's like every 2 page, you can just like make a copy and put it in the classroom. Like you don't need to pre-prepare anything. It's ready there. Like I highly recommend this book. There is also like using Corpora in the language learning classroom. Again, this is like a guide for teachers if you want to become like a corpus teacher. Now, more importantly, there's like 3 press books. So these are books published online through the Pressbook platform. These are all 3 free that combine different like lesson plans using corpus in the classroom. So this is one that I edited with Ingrid Veloso, and you can see here, like for example, if you're teaching things related to gender-related vocabulary, you can just click on that link and there's a lesson plan ready. There's like the difference between through and toward, the difference between in, on, and at. These are lesson plans created by pre-service teachers who were studying to be a teacher, and they learned about corpus and created lesson plans. Same thing for this one. This one's by Ellen LaFoe, and these are tasks created by in-service teachers, and you can see that they are divided across like the level. So this would be like primary and lower secondary school, upper secondary school, content-based, and like ESP learning. And again, these are like free. You can download. This one even has like printable sheets, that you can apply in your classroom. Like there's not a lot of work that you have to do before. Okay, so my take-home message. Data-driven learning like incorporates authenticity, like allows students to explore real language and context. I think like the main thing for me, it promotes students' autonomy, like students can answer their own language questions. Also related to specificity, like teachers can use Corpora that reflect the type of discourse or like disciplinary practice that students want to produce themselves. Now, I mentioned this Padlet many times. So this is a Padlet that you can access that like puts together all these links and more. It has more resources of different websites that have like ready-made lesson plans for teachers. I'm gonna leave this up here. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larissa. This was amazing. So informative, so much information. Bumped with all of this. I'm so sorry, folks, that we were cut off, and Larissa too. I know you've prepared so much and wanted to cover it all. If you are running into something, feel free to finish this meeting. But I'm gonna leave this time to ask questions because we were cut off, so we have some time. Plus, the next meeting starts at 6:30, so we should be good. Hopefully, nobody interferes.
Somebody asked, can you put the link in the chat?